Well, I think the species is the whole argument. You've got the book in your hand over there, or on your table. That was Darwin's whole point, the origin of species. So, what is the origin of species?
It is by a process of descent with modification through insensibly distinct intermediate forms. It's a continuum. And as I mentioned earlier, that's the problem with defining species, because species, the concept of species involves the discontinuity that we observe between carp and goldfish, between red-shafted flickers and yellow-shafted flickers. And we understand that as evolutionary biologists, it's not a problem with the theory, but it seems to me that the definition of kind is at the very base of beginning to test Genesis as a theory of the diversity of life.
I would say the very same is true. The definition of species and being able to nail it down clearly and falsify it is the very base of the evolution theory. We both have the same predicament. I cannot tell you what a kind is, and I don't know that Carolus Linnaeus's classification system with kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is the same as God's definition of kind. We today put, for instance, a whale and a dolphin in the mammal family. But the Bible may consider that a fish. After all, it does live in the water. And I don't know that it is or it isn't. But if the Bible does consider a whale in the fish kind, that would not mean the Bible is wrong. That would mean our current way of dividing animals up is different than the Bible's way of dividing animals up. That's all. You can't say one's wrong, one's right. It's just a different way of looking at it. It's like a metric system and a standard system. Also, the carp and the goldfish, I'm sure you're aware, have a different number of chromosomes.
Right, the goldfish is a tetraploid, as I recall, relative to the carp.
And the goldfish is...
And I might add that there are actually a number of cases among animals, and many cases in plants, where species, and I'm going to begin to put that in quotes, have different chromosome numbers and yet hybridize
sure.
to some extent. And again, we understand how they can do that. And,
oh yeah, I taught biology, I understand. But the hybridization...
that raises another interesting question about how chromosome number relates to kind and what God had in mind in that respect.
Right. I suspect you're aware that humans have 46 chromosomes, and tobacco has 48. And amoebas have 50. And yet the evolution textbooks constantly say that we came from a single-celled amoeba-like creature, and yet they've already got more chromosomes than we do. They're ahead of us, not behind us.
Whoa. Actually, I don't even know what species have the most chromosomes, but it's certainly not related to phylogenetic progression. I know of no evolutionary biologist that makes that claim.
I agree. No evolutionary biologist makes that claim because the data is so against the evolutionary theory. I've got a chart.
No. Because when we reconstruct phylogenies, which show the order of evolutionary progression, and then we map chromosome numbers on them, there is not a progression. It's not because it's inconsistent with evolutionary theory.
So don't you see how that the assumption that evolution has taken place is the underlying philosophy for how you interpret the evidence? Your theory drives your research instead of the research investigating or throwing out the theory. You have it backwards.
Yeah, in fact, this was the point you were making when you made the fallacious statement about the freshly frozen dinosaur specimen from Antarctica. I'm glad I have the opportunity to go back to that, actually. You used that in the context, that against which I take great umbrage. And that is, you were implying then and implying now that when evolutionary biologists come across a datum or have gotten some experimental results, have the potential to gather a data like carbon dating this alleged fresh dinosaur from the Antarctic, that we're going to find that it's inconsistent with evolutionary theory, and therefore we're not going to date it. And that's what you said in that particular statement. And my umbrage is that this implies that there's some sort of conspiracy among evolutionary biologists, and I assure you that is not the case.
No, I would not accuse of you of being involved in a
We
conspiracy.
are not trying to modify the data to fit the theory. There's nothing that I would like more than to find some fundamental flaw with the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. I would become a wealthy person. I would enjoy enormous success in life. I just can't find it. It's not there.
Carbon dating is, how it works, my understanding of carbon dating, and then because I think the average layman does not comprehend it. And here's the Hovind explanation, and you can take notes and tell me where I'm wrong. The Earth has an atmosphere around it, roughly 200 miles thick, though effectively only 10 or 15 miles thick. But radiation from the sun and stars, stellar radiation, but mostly the sun's radiation, strikes the atmosphere and produces carbon-14. This carbon-14 is produced by the extra energy from the sunlight. Today's atmosphere is 0.0000765% radioactive carbon. Most of it is normal carbon, but a small amount is radioactive carbon. Normally carbon is atomic number 12. Carbon-14 is simply the radioactive isotope of carbon. Most of it is normal oxygen, typically, to become carbon dioxide, and it mixes in with the atmosphere with all the rest of the carbon dioxide that's out there. The wind currents and convection currents generally mix it, so we would assume whatever's being formed in the upper atmosphere is about the same proportion in the lower atmosphere. Not never proven, but a reasonable assumption, and I won't argue about that. Plants breathe in CO2 and make it part of their tissue. Animals eat the plants and make it part of their bodies. So the assumption is that whatever ratio of carbon-14 is in the upper atmosphere would be the same that's in the plants and in the animals. Probably a reasonable assumption. I won't argue with that. Radioactive carbon-14 compared to normal carbon-12 is the ratio that they're looking for. So they assume that the amount in the atmosphere is the same ratio found in plants and animals. When the plant or animal dies, it stops taking in new C14. Stops breathing, stops eating. Whatever it has begins to decay. And half of this carbon-14 is going to decay every 5,730 years, roughly. Some might argue about the number, but it's the concept I want you to get. Some say 5,690, but 5,630 is close enough. Half of the carbon-14 is going to decay, fall apart. So, by comparing the amount of C14 in the object being dated with the amount currently in the atmosphere, it can be determined how long the object has been dead. This all sounds good, except it's based on several assumptions that throw the whole thing off. If I told you to fill a barrel with water, but I had drilled holes on the other side of the barrel, so as you reach up a certain point, it starts to leak out. You're adding it, and it's leaking out at the same time. This is a good analogy of how carbon dating works. The sun produces it, and radioactive decay takes it out. At some point, when you're filling the barrel, you're going to reach a stage called equilibrium, where you're filling it and it's leaking at the same speed, and you will never fill the barrel. Well, Willard Libby, University of Chicago, and others have done lots of studies. He's the one who invented carbon dating, got a Nobel Prize for it in '53. The sunlight producing carbon-14 in the atmosphere and the decay taking it out should at some point reach equilibrium. So the studies came back where the result was that probably if you took a brand new Earth, created it from scratch, stuck it out in the solar system, let this process begin, sunlight producing it, decay taking it out, it would take about 30,000 years for the atmosphere to reach equilibrium. Well, the atmosphere is still not in equilibrium. C14 is increasing in the atmosphere. There is more now than there was 100 years ago or 50 years ago when they first tested it. So that proves carbon-14 is a great proof the Earth is less than 30,000 years old because it is still not in equilibrium. Today, the calibration curve for carbon dating, you get about 16 clicks on your, this is a rough analogy here, about 16 clicks per minute per gram of C14. If you waited 5,730 years, you would expect to get half that amount, or 8. If you wait another 5,730 years, you would get only 4 clicks per minute per gram, and you would assume the object is 11,400 years old. Theoretically, it never goes to 0, but the line diminishes to where it's unmeasurable after 30 to 50,000 years. You just can't measure it because the line's basically straight. So I agree, if it all works right, you would get 30 to 50,000 years able to measure with carbon-14 dating. Problems, serious problems associated with this, and we can talk about all the other dating methods if you'd like. But if you walked into a room and found a candle burning on the table, and asked you the question, when was it lit? You say, I don't know, it was burning when I walked in. Well, we can do some things to this candle that are called empirical science. Hard, testable, nobody's going to argue with you, science. We can measure the candle. Let's suppose it is 7 inches tall. We get all the scientists in the world, we all measure it with incredible, precise instruments, and we all agree it's 7 inches tall. How long has it been burning? Anybody know? I won't tell you, will it? Let's do some more empirical science. Let's measure how fast it burns. Let's suppose after an extensive